Virginia, and a ghost and a lighthouse keeper, and Ben will just tell us the rest of the story. Benjamin Trask has more than 20 years of experience in the classroom. He teaches history at Gildersleeve Middle School in Newport News, Virginia. He holds an undergraduate degree in education and a master's of arts in history, both from Virginia Tech. He served as a communications officer in the United States Marine Corps and then went back to school where he earned a Master of Science degree in library science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Prior to teaching, he briefly was a librarian at Norfolk Public Library, where I was fortunate to get to know him. And then he was the librarian and a curator in Newport News at the Mariners Museum. His publications, books, and articles involve yellow fever, particularly the 1855 yellow fever epidemic in Norfolk and Portsmouth, American Civil War, and African-American maritime culture. Since 2013, he has worked as a deckhand and narrator on the Miss Hampton to Harbor cruise that is out of Hampton, and he does a great job. I highly recommend it. He is a self-described Navy brat and a resident of Hampton. He enjoys exercise, origami, and of course, history road trips and talking about history. He learned about the Hudgins House ghost story while he was researching a forthcoming book on lighthouses of southeastern Virginia. And we've already talked about a future program on lighthouses of southeastern Virginia and also yellow fever and the Irish. So watch for that coming up. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Benn Trask. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Peggy. Good evening, everybody. We're going to talk about a story that starts in 1882. I was hoping that we could do this around Christmas time because in some ways it's sort of a classic Christmas time ghost story, and we'll talk more about that later, but I'm happy to do it now. We're going to have times where we're looking very, very closely at sources because as an historian, you have the documentation. This is not just asking somebody what they remember or something like that. We're really trying to show you that there is some type of paper trail that describes this story. And you can see from the images here, that's the house, how it originally looked in Mathews. It does involve a witch at one point, and it also involves some type of spirit, okay? So my interest in the house came from looking at a website doing my lighthouse research. And according to the Lighthouse Friends website on Wolf Trap Lighthouse, in 1882 on December 8th, A.F. Hudgens, who is Augustine, goes by the name Gus, resigns from the lighthouse position because his family is being tormented by some type of spirit, okay? And prior to him retiring, the district inspector gave him leave in order to investigate and figure out what the problem was, but that problem could not be solved. Now, let me think about that. Imagine going to your boss and saying, my family's being tormented by a ghost, can I have leave? And the boss says yes, and we'll talk about the boss later. The other thing that's interesting about that is that there were many prominent citizens in the community, according to the report. They did not make fun of the Hudgens family. They, in fact, came to the house and tried to see if they could get the problem resolved and see what the issue was. So this is Gus and his wife, Molly, okay? Again, longtime residents of Mathews. A family member gave this to me. I'll tell you the wonders of doing research. Belong to the Mathews Historical Facebook page. I was looking at that. I was just started doing research on this and this image popped up. The woman that posted it was not talking about the lighthouse story, but of course I immediately recognized her name. Well, I have family from Mathews, so I had to get in touch with her. So my aunt's husband, David Hudgens, I found out that they were friends on Facebook. So I asked David, I said, David, can you get me this woman's number? And it turned out her name is Cindy, and she lives in Honolulu. And lo and behold, I got in touch with her in Honolulu through Facebook, and she has been very kind in providing me this information. So this is family images, but the family has given me permission to use these. And this is how that came about. And what's interesting about this, I kept finding more and more documentation. So clearly you get a look at what Gus and his wife Molly looked like. So again, I want to stress, they were married in 1874, Mathews County. Parents were from Mathews. As many of you know, Hudgens is the most popular surname in Mathews. Their extended family lives nearby. Gus in 1870 is listed as a mariner, which is consistent as a lighthouse keeper. Previously, he had been a lighthouse keeper at the New Point Lighthouse. At the time that he resigned, he was a lighthouse keeper at Wolf Trap. That's also off Mathews, but we're going to talk about those two types of lighthouse. And at the time of the haunting, they had 2 children. And one child is going to come into play in this, okay? So want to document, clearly Gus is in the lighthouse service. He's on the official register in 1881 and 1883. And when I went to the National Archives to do research, hoping to find a letter that he had asked for leave or that he had retired under the file with the Hudgens lighthouse keepers, there was no documentation. But his last day of work was in fact December 8th, 1882. So this is the story as it originally appeared in the Baltimore Sun. It calls it a Chesapeake Bay ghost, and they describe how Gus was given leave by, they call it Captain Evans, but the officer was not a captain at the time, was given leave to investigate this story, determine why this ghost was haunting them. They describe also that one person, the young girl, had her face slapped and left a mark about that. That's important too. We'll get back to that. So this is the story as it first appeared in the Baltimore paper. Notice the date is December 9th, 1882. The same day, the article appears in 2 other newspapers. One is in Alexandria, and the other is in Washington, D.C. And this had me confused, as if the person who sold the story sold it to all 3 papers at the same time. And then I looked closer and gave it some more effort and more thought. This is the evening paper. So the morning paper, December 9th, 1882, it's in the Baltimore paper. By that night, the same day, these 2 papers had picked it up and also are reprinting the story. And they use the same story. They call it a ghost or a Chesapeake Bay ghost, but the contents are pretty much the same. So clearly you have a situation where you have a ghost in the Hudgins house. Some type of spirit is tormenting the family. This is a later picture of Molly, and this is the actual house. Down here on the left, the house this is how you would see the house today. So let me explain to you what we have here. This is a lighthouse. This is a screw pile lighthouse. Screw pile lighthouses are located over water. Anywhere from about 3 to 12 feet of water is where you might potentially put one of those lighthouses. And that type of lighthouse does not have a family living in the lighthouse. The lighthouse keepers live there. You would have a lighthouse, three lighthouse keepers. They would be on a rotation. They would come out there. There might be 1 keeper, 2 keepers, 3 keepers. Families do not live in a screw pile lighthouse. This further south, this is the New Point Lighthouse. That family, there you could have a family that lived there. And of course, what you're looking at here, this is again, the picture of in the early 1900s of Molly and family members, that's on land. Remember this again, because the story's going to get changed as if somehow now the lighthouse is getting haunted. not the lighthouse keeper's house. So one story that's really unique about this is another paper in Virginia. It's the Stanton Spectator, and this is December 26, 1882. And they have an original letter that someone has sent from Mathews that describes the spirit that's tormenting the family. So this is a different source of information about this. And couple things to point out. For some reason, the spirit was paid $5 to torment the family. We're going to come back to that. And they will stop tormenting the family for $50. Now, how do they communicate with the spirits? Well, they use raps and knocks and things like that. Why does a spirit think that they can use and benefit from $5 or $50? I could not tell you. And notice this line down here at the bottom, where it says the family still hold the fort, because we're going to see that line again in other stories. But this is a little different spin on the story. And again, this isn't extracted from a letter. It's causing a lot of excitement in the county, and somebody has shared this with somebody in the western part of the state. So, stories on the move. This is the National Republican, December 12th, 1882 in DC. And this also appears in Denton, Maryland, in the Denton Journal. Now, a lot of newspapers will pick up the story, they'll shorten it, they'll tweak it a bit, but they don't offer any commentary. This paper does, and this paper is clearly saying, that there's a folly about the lighthouse keeper, and they're saying that the lighthouse keeper has been driven into resignation because ghosts are at his house. Okay, and their explanation to solve the problem is using a shotgun. And if you put that shotgun to that ghost and put that ghost in the graveyard, you'll solve that problem. Okay, so the story is changing now. It's not saying whether the lighthouse keeper's house, the residence, is haunted, or is it the lighthouse? And notice the story here. Now you've got a story about a lighthouse that's haunted, not the keeper's house on land. All right, Norfolk papers. We talked about the Baltimore paper having the article on December 9th, 1882. The next day it appears in the Norfolk papers. So the story on the left is December 10th. They call it a Chesapeake Bay ghost. Notice when they reprint the story again on December 23rd, it's a lighthouse ghost. But the contents of the story are the same. And they talk about what the ghost will do, dance, shuffle, make noises, things like that, and communicating with people with raps and knocks. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the times. And this sort of puts this in perspective. These three ladies here, especially the two on either side, are the Fox sisters. And Margaret and Katie Fox were people that take a story from their house in upstate New York, and they describe how they're able to communicate with a spirit of someone who's been killed in their house by raps and knocks. And so they become very popular for being involved in seances and things of that nature, and communicating with various types of way like that. Mediums, as they were called. This is very, very important. A lot of women were mediums. Sometimes the mediums would use you with a paper and pen, and they would literally put you into a trance, and they would write on a piece of paper. These ladies are going to continue to do this. They become very popular. A lot of people see this as humbug. They're very critical. They would appear on stage. They would get frisked. But somehow they were able to use these knocks and raps and stuff like that. So very controversial figures. Now, the middle image was done by a man named William H. Mumler in 1872. And if you don't recognize that, that's Mary Todd Lincoln. And behind her, this is a spirit photograph, is supposedly Abraham Lincoln. And there's a fascinating story about Mr. Mumler, in that Mr. Mumler is actually brought to trial in New York because he's committing a fraud. He's charging people $10 for these images, which is quite a high price. He's not that far from P.T. Barnum's great museum. P.T. Barnum actually speaks on behalf of the city of New York and says, this is humbug. What's interesting about that, there's a lot of expert witnesses. There's a lot of people in the spiritualist movement and things like that that come to testify. In the end of the trial, they can't tell how he does this trick. So he's found innocent. And again, that puts an interesting spin on that. This is also the time when, if you've ever heard of the Winchester Mystery House, 1884 is when the Winchester widow is going to move out to California, and she's going to start to build and expand this house. Some people may know the story, some people don't. But this is a story that really doesn't hold up to a lot of scrutiny. But the myth around the story is she's moved out west. Her family is haunted because she's inherited the Winchester fortune, and these rifles have killed thousands of people, specifically Native Americans, and they are her tormentor. She's had family members that die. She holds seances in the house, and the way that she can keep the spirits away is continuing to build the house. Supposedly she's told by a medium that when she stops building, she'll die. So she never stops changing and adding to the house. A lot of investigation with this puts that to bed, so to speak, as a myth, but you can still go out to see the Winchester Mystery House. And there was a movie that came out a few years ago that was actually a pretty good movie that described and worked up this myth. Spiritualist movement. Again, this is another spiritualist photograph that starts in the 1840s. It talks about people and believes that spirits are around us all the time. There are people that we can communicate with. We can communicate with famous people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Women become very heavily involved in this. Even the Lincolns are involved in it. By that, I mean, Mary Todd Lincoln has 2 children that die, and she is trying to use a medium while she's in the White House to communicate with her children. Supposedly President Lincoln also attends these seances, not that he's a believer, but he's trying to be a supportive husband with the idea that his wife will come to terms with the death of the children. She has further stress, of course, at the end of the Civil War, her husband's killed. So she's, again, determined to get in touch with her family. This is important, and this is one of the things that perpetuates the spiritualist movement, is that you have more than 700,000 soldiers and civilians that are killed during the Civil War. And family members have lost their family members. They've never seen them again, and they want to know how they are. And this movement helps to continue that if you can get to a medium that can help you learn about how your family member is. Another interesting thing about this time period, if you think about the Christmas Carol, which is 1843, an English tradition that we talk about here, the original title for A Christmas Carol in Prose, it's a ghost story of Christmas. This is one of the reasons I wanted to tell this story around Christmas time, because it fits in very lightly. There's a strong English tradition of ghost stories around this time. Now, we're going to focus back now on the actual Hudgens family. Mathews community is upset. They've got night watch parties and things like that. These people are not angry or mocking the Hudgens family. They're trying to figure out what is that's tormenting the family. Oftentimes with stories like this, you look for personal tragedies, okay? Is there something that would involve a spirit, and you'll hear about that. Well, Gus is a lighthouse keeper in 1879. When he moves from New Point to Wolf Trap, he gets a small cut in pay. That's the only tragedy I found that involved him. Also, that summer in 1882, Gus and Molly had a child that died, a 4-month-old child named Harold. But again, putting that in context, there are 27 children in Mathews in that same year that are age 2 and younger that died. This is a family tragedy, but it's not something that's uncommon. So you're trying to put this story in context, would there be something that would bring a spirit about? And it doesn't appear to be. Now, remember the boss who gave Gus leave to go find out what the issue was with the ghost story, and he was unsuccessful. Well, this is the guy. His name's Robley D. Evans, and he is going to be a naval officer. He's going to rise to the rank of admiral. He's going to be the first commander of the Great White Fleet. He actually is going to live for a period of time at Old Point Comfort. And he writes 2 autobiographies, and one of them is titled A Sailor's Log. And he tells 3 fascinating stories in that autobiography that describe how it appears that there are spirits on board a ship when in fact they're not, and they get resolved. So one of the stories very quickly is the ship is out at sea, the sun starts to set, there's no land in sight, and it appears if a bell is tolling as someone has died. And this comes out around sunset. And this really upsets the crew of the ship. They can't figure out what it is that's going on. Where is this bell coming from? Well, it turns out there are a couple large copper cauldrons that they're using to cook the chow in. And as the chow is eaten and the copper kettles start to cool, they contract, and it sends out this sound throughout the ship. So he knows about that story. Another more interesting story, they are in port, but they are in quarantine because of yellow fever that's in the port in the Caribbean. Young sailor falls from the rigging, hits the deck, and he's killed. Normally you would take that body, you would put it in a shroud made from a hammock, or it might be an old sail. You would put weights on it and you would have a ceremony and bury him at sea. For some reason, the captain wanted that sailor to have a coffin. Now, they actually have a ship carpenter. He makes the coffin. When he gets ready to put the lid on the coffin, he does not have nice long, what are called coffin screws. They're very ornate. What he has are regular nails. They put the body on display, or the coffin on display on the deck. There's about 350 crew members. They'll go by, they pay respects, and all of a sudden, the coffin lid starts to creak open. Well, you have nails, you don't have screws, it's in the Caribbean, it's hot, there are gases coming out of the body, there's rigor mortis, all sorts of things like that. And this really freaks the crew out. So they nail that coffin down again, and he's part of a crew that's going to take the coffin in another boat. They're going to row out to sea, and they're going to bury the coffin at sea. They do that, they row away from the vessel. They get to this other boat, they put the coffin in the water, they start to row back, and he turns around, and one of the sailors screams, "He's following us." The coffin weight has shifted, the coffin is upright, and as they're rowing away, the coffin is bouncing up and down in the water like this, like he's following them. They get near the coffin again, he smashes a hole in the coffin, water leaks in, and it goes down there. When he tells you these stories, he really admits that the crew is frightened, okay? But he also realizes there is a solution to this. So I say this may explain why he's able to say, okay, I'm going to give you a couple weeks leave. You go home, you figure out what that ghost situation is, and then you come back to work. Doesn't work out. Now, there is no Mathews paper in 1882. The Mathews Journal gets started on its own early 1900s. The 1930s, it's going to merge with the Gloucester paper. The closest paper at that time is a paper called The Liberal, and it comes from Gloucester Courthouse. And in January 6, 1883, you find this very cryptic message: the Mathews ghost has ceased to trouble. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't look at earlier editions of the paper, they don't exist. There's a good article about this particular source in one of the genealogy magazines in Gloucester. There's probably 8 copies, editions of this paper that exist. They're all at William & Mary. They've made nice reproductions at the Gloucester Library. And this is the one closest to 1882. this one in January 1863. The Mathews ghost has ceased to trouble. Ghost is in quotes, so clearly the editor does not believe in ghosts, but has ceased to trouble, indicating that something has happened to terminate the problem of the ghost and the haunting. Okay. Story gets national coverage. It gets as far west as Chicago. It also appears in one paper in Philadelphia. It's more likely to be seen in the Midwest and in the South. I don't find any location of the story in the Northeast. But as the story gets told and it gets out further west, it's clearly now there is a ghost in the lighthouse, not in the keeper's residence, okay? And it is frightening the lighthouse keepers, and they are resigning. So Gus Hudgens resigns as a lighthouse keeper to go confront a ghost at his house. As the story gets retold, he has quit his job in the lighthouse and the ghost has chased him off. Story's changing, okay? And you have the same version of this story. Again, this is a Little Rock paper here on the left. The middle one is the Courier Journal of Louisville. And finally, the Opelika Observer, also in Alabama. At this time, the lighthouse is haunted and the lighthouse ghost is chasing off the lighthouse keepers. Story's changed. So now the ghost is in the lighthouse. Now, this paper here, again, this is the Smelter. It's Pittsburgh, Kansas. This is the last documentation I have for the paper in 1883. And they're quoting the Richmond Whig, and they use this line again, the family still holds down the fort. Pretty good indication that they got that information from the Stanton paper. I don't have any more documentation on the story in the 19th century, but the story sort of resurfaces in the 1930s, okay? Again, this is the Molly and the house as it would have looked about that time. This is keepers, instructions, and things like that for lighthouse keepers. The federal government during the Great Depression did all sorts of things to keep people employed. And one of the things that they did is that they would pay people to go around and interview older members of the county to describe ghost stories, legends, recipes, traditions, involvement with Christmas, things of that nature. And you would write up the story based on what this older person in the county told you about, and you would submit the story and you would get paid, okay? And these files are at UPA. So these are Works Projects Administration, and they do this story to keep local legends alive. And in 1930s, there is a Mrs. Lewis that recalls the Hudgins House stories, and she has a different twist on the story. According to her, there has been a curse put on the house by somebody in Gloucester who wanted Gus's job, as a lighthouse keeper, and wanted Gus to resign. Well, that's exactly what happened. Gus did resign. And there's a minister, according to Miss Lewis, that comes to the house to exorcise the house, but a buzzard flies down the stairs and chases him out of the house. And Gus decides, according to Miss Lewis, he's going to go to Norfolk to consult his own witch. And this witch tells him what he needs to do. He needs to come up with a likeness of the spirit or the witch who put the curse on the house. He needs to cover that image with cornbread so she cannot see him. You would take possibly some type of silver coin, you would melt it into a bullet and fire the bullet through the cornbread into the image of the spirit. And supposedly when this happened, there's a woman who is a conjurer that dies in the field, and now the spirit is broken. So remember that story that said the ghost is no longer an issue? Maybe this is what happened that ended this story. So Interesting story here, interesting spin. The African-American female conjurer, that is an interesting point. You know, why would somebody be involved in that? Why would somebody believe that? Why would somebody promote that? Oftentimes people that are in a minority position, if you happen to be an older African-American woman living alone and you're living in the South and you want to be treated with more respect, you might promote that image that you have certain powers, so to speak. And that would keep people at a distance and keep you with respect. So this happens to other cultures where people get attacked. You know, otherwise they're going to use that image that they have that authority or that spell or that magic, so to speak, and play upon that to their advantage. But according to the story, this is the stairs that you see on the right. These other stairs on the left, that's just another image, but this is the actual stairs from the house. Again, if you're thinking about a buzzard coming down and chasing out the minister, what does it look like? Well, those are the actual stairs inside the house. Okay. Now, what does Mr. Evans have to say about competing for jobs in the lighthouse profession when he's there? He says that's exactly what happened, in the sense that people would sometimes accuse lighthouse keepers of being drunks, and the idea that they would then lose that job and somebody else could get it. He, in fact, in 1886 signs off for the removal of the lighthouse keeper at Newport Comfort, Charles W. Forrest. Suppose he has a drinking problem, Evans signs off in the paperwork. He also even describes a story of somebody that wants to get a lighthouse keeper removed, and as evidence that this lighthouse keeper is not of a right mind, this guy's played cards with him, and he says he really makes really bad decisions in cards, and that's a clear indication that he should not be a lighthouse keeper in charge or anything like that. So he provides that sort of background information that tells you, yeah, there was competition for those jobs, just like Mrs. Lewis is talking about. So again, here we got the cornbread and the bullet through the cornbread. Spell's broken. Now, a lot of people know about Old House Woods and Mathews and stuff like that. Earliest documentation I have on that is the Baltimore Sun article on September 26, 1926. I don't see any connection to this story and that broader story, which gets lots of attention in Mathews. So can't make a connection to that, but many people can tell you about all the different apparitions that are associated with that story. I don't find any more documentation about the lighthouse until 1978. There's a magazine called the Mathews Magazine, and it has a story called the Hudgens Pesky Witch. A family member of the Hudgens family writes a master's thesis about folklore in Mathews County, and she will discuss this story, again, as it relates to the family. Okay, so I'm very fortunate to get in touch with two descendants of Molly and Gus, and the family has held on to the house for 100 years. It's no longer in the family hands, and they answered my questions, and it's interesting to see how they see the story. I asked them about the haunted house. Would they be afraid or anything like that? Nothing like that whatsoever. And one of the ones, Cindy, talks about the fact that according to the story, you got a silver bullet through the cornbread, and that breaks the spell, and therefore end the story. And they really enjoyed visiting the house. They lived next door. There was evidently a pet pig named Walter Cronkite, all sorts of gardens, stuff like that, great grandparents. Another descendant, Ginger, I asked her about that, and she would remember the story, but when it was told to her by her grandmother, it was told in such a way that maybe it wasn't really true, but they would tell the story. And again, no issue with the house, but that makes all the sense in the world. Why would you stay in the haunted house if it's still there, right? So whatever it was, that spell has been broken and the family stayed there. This gentleman, Mr. Peterson, now owns the house. And there's not a lot of places in the world where you can pull up in a pickup truck in somebody's house and say, I understand your house might be haunted. And lo and behold, Mr. Peterson acknowledged the story, and he and I started talking. And in Mathews, though, if you know Mathews and you can tell him that you got family members living there, and I certainly do, and Mr. Peterson and I struck up a conversation, and he was more than kind to let me go into his house and look things around, talk about stories, talk about maybe things that were happening in the house. And he's done a wonderful job. These are actual custom-made tiles that you see here. The one on the left, that is the house how it originally worked. He's done a wonderful job in making the house really a showcase. The other cat you see there, that's his cat Bosun. Is a black cat, a very nice cat. And he loves to tell you about the house, the additions that were made and things that he's done to the house. Now, I've been to see him twice. The second time, he does talk about strange things that happen there, things that seem to disappear and reappear. But nothing there that's, just destroying him or distraught or anything like that, bothering him in any particular way. The last time I was there, though, we were walking through there and we're going out the kitchen. And out the kitchen door, on the way out, he asked me about the tombstone. Did I tell him about the tombstone last time? Well, now I'm working on a ghost story, and a tombstone would be pretty important. I would remember that. He's never mentioned a tombstone. So he takes me in the back, and he points out this tombstone, which is on the right, which is in the back of the house. This is the tombstone for Gus and Mary today. The family's done a wonderful job. They've taken the old tombstone and they have updated it. They've modernized it. It looks very nice. That's the Pear Tree Cemetery in Onema, and that's where they're married now. So what do you do with an old tombstone? Not sure what you do with an older tombstone. They did take it home. And as you see here, this is me actually holding the tombstone for my second visit in the house this summer. The reason I went to see Mr. Peterson is this book was published this summer by the Mathews Historical Society, and it features the house. It does not talk about the haunting of the house. It talks about when the house was built and things of that nature. Seems to be some differences. Mr. Peterson dates the house a little earlier, but maybe somewhere early 1800s, as late as the 1840s. So the house, when it had this spirit come to it, was not an old house when it happened. Lighthouses and ghost stories are great. I think that's one of the reasons that this story gets transferred from the house to the lighthouse. We all know about those types of stories. And again, trying to put this in a little bit of context. Again, in the 1930s, there are people that are going to be interviewed by the WPA and historians about Mathews legends. One of those legends describes how an individual that was a spy that was saved by Mr. Hudgens was eventually arrested by the Federals and executed. Turns out he's a friend of John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth supposedly had extracted a promise from the president saying that you would not execute my friend, and therefore that was grounds for him to shoot Abraham Lincoln. That is a fabricated story that comes out about 1865, 1866 in the newspapers. What fascinated the folklore is that in the 1930s, that story was still circulating around the county. So 1865 to 1930s. This story starts in 1882, and there are still family members that can talk about this story now in 2020. Stories like this bond the family together. It's something to talk about. It is shared family lore, and it becomes very important. And one of the things I want to point out about this story is that a lot of ghost stories, there's sort of a prefab nature to it. And by that, I mean, a lot of people have heard the story about prom night, a young couple gets killed, and the anniversary will come around. Somebody will see the nice dressed couple on the road, pick them up. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go back home. The person takes them home, and they turn around and look in the back of the car, and the ghost has disappeared. That story appears in a lot of places. Another story that appears in a lot of places is the one about some type of light moving down the railroad tracks. There's one of those that deals with the light at West Point. A lot of stories now deal with burying or building a house or some type of construction on a sacred Indian burial ground. That story gets told a lot in different places. This story is not like that, okay? It really is unique. There's been no reason to think that Gus and Molly were trying to communicate with any family member, hadn't done anything wrong or anything like that. And again, the story has some interesting twists. If you want to see how newspapers can turn the story. I do think there's more information to be found out there. I want to go back and look at the National Archives under the inspector's papers to see if it talks about the letter of resignation or anything like that. But so far, I haven't found anything like that in the National Archives. So that's my story. And hopefully you guys ask any questions or anything like that. I will be happy to do that. So if we can get Peggy back in here, and you can tell me what's what, Peggy.
I'm here. If you all have questions, there's an icon down at the bottom bar. You may have to tap your screen to make it come up that says Q&A. And we would love to have your questions. Or not. This is our first time. If you do have questions, you can feel free to email us and we'll get them to Ben.
Or you can use that.
Or you can use that. Notice that Ben has two N's, bentrask@gmail.com. Ben, thank you so much. That was an amazing.
I got somebody popping in here in the chat. Chat will do too.
Okie dokie.
I got, if you want to use the chat to ask me questions, that's fine too. I got to thank you so much. You're welcome.
This was fun. I hope you all had a good time too. There may be some more questions. I will keep my eye on the screen, but in the meantime, I hope you'll come back next month. This is going to turn into a series again, we hope. Where is the Winchester House, Ben?
In San Jose, California.
Oh, wow. I was thinking Winchester, Virginia.
Nope.
That's a good question. Next month on Wednesday, February 10th, the second Wednesday in the month at 7 p.m., the education director at MacArthur Memorial, Amanda Williams, will be speaking to us on World War II and Hollywood, a program that she has worked up. Should be very, very good. Another good program. And you will receive a notice on that if you are on our email list. If not, go to our website. It's not up there yet, but we will have an announcement of the program coming up in February, and you may register on our website. We will also, if you're not a member, you don't have to be a member to attend. You go to the website. All you need to do is fill out a registration form with your name and your email. And we are planning on putting the program, thank you, Mary Cannon, we're planning on putting the program on our website. I'm not sure exactly how soon it will go on the website, but we are putting it on the website. We are recording it. So you can see it again. Anybody else? Well, good night. And y'all stay safe, Ben.
Okay. And just so you
What is our
know,
website?
the Honolulu family member, they were here.
Oh, great. That's terrific.
So you've gone from here to Hawaii.
Okay, our website, somebody asked, is all run together, norfolkhistorical.org. Do not type in norfolkhistoricalsociety.org. That'll take you to Connecticut. So just norfolkhistorical.org, and that's our website. And in not too long, you'll be able to view this again, and you'll be able to sign up for future programs. And give us feedback. This is our first time. So if you have positive comments, we'd love to have them. If you've got suggestions of how we can do it better, we would love to hear that as well. So thank you so much for coming. And Ben, you have any final words?
No, and my son saw it in Texas, so you've got
Okie dokie.
you've got national coverage.
I think one of our board members saw it in Georgia. She said, I'm not going to be there next week. And I said, you can watch it from Georgia. So hi, Ann, if you're watching. Thanks again for coming.
Okay.
See you in February. Bye-bye.